was 15 when it happened. It was a Friday night in late September, just starting to get cold where I lived. My parents went out to dinner with some family friends, and they said they would not be home until late. I had the house to myself. I invited over my neighbor and best friend Chris. He was the same age as me and lived across the street. We usually hung out in my basement and played games or watched movies, but that night we got bored. At some point, he brought up playing hide and seek. It sounded dumb at first, but we had done it before with a group, and it had been fun. The house was small, but it had a lot of places to hide, especially in the dark. We turned off most of the lights to make it scarier. The only light on was in the kitchen. The rules were simple. No going outside, no going into the attic or the crawl space. Basement, bedrooms, closets, and under furniture were all fair game. Chris wanted to hide first, so I covered my eyes in the living room and counted to 50. I could hear him running at first, and then silence. I finished counting and announced that I was coming. I started in the kitchen since it was right there, but there was nowhere good to hide. I checked behind the basement door, then down the hall. I looked in the bathroom. Empty. I opened the closet near the front door. Nothing. I went upstairs. The floor creaked under me, and every little sound made me tense. I checked my parents' bedroom first, looking under the bed and behind the dresser. Nobody. I went down the hall into my room. It was messy, but not enough for Chris to hide well. I still checked the closet and under the desk. Nothing. That left the guest room at the end of the hall. The door was cracked open. I pushed it slowly, expecting him to jump out and scare me, but the room was dark and quiet. I stepped inside and scanned around. I bent down to look under the bed. Nothing. I opened the closet door. Empty. At that point, I thought maybe he was in the basement, so I went back downstairs. I checked behind the laundry machines and in the storage space under the stairs. I was about to give up when I finally found him curled up behind some boxes. He laughed and asked how long it had taken me. I told him way too long. Then we switched. He counted and I hid. I went upstairs and slid under the guest bed, pulling the bed skirt down to cover me. My heart raced while I lay there in the dark. I heard him come upstairs a few minutes later, his footsteps slow and heavy on the floor. He opened the bathroom door first, then he stepped into my parents' room. After a while, the footsteps came down the hall toward where I was. I could hear him breathing as he walked into the guest room. He stopped near the bed. I held my breath. His shoes shuffled against the carpet. Then silence. A long silence. I thought he had figured it out and was about to yank up the bed skirt, but instead, he walked out. I lay there a few more minutes, waiting to hear him call that I had won, but the house stayed too quiet. Finally, I crawled out. I went downstairs expecting to find him on the couch, but he wasn't there. I called out that the game was over. A voice came from the basement saying he was down there. I thought he was messing with me. I walked to the basement door, opened it, and shouted down the stairs. He shouted back that he was still looking for me, and he asked where I was hiding. That made my stomach twist. I told him I was out now and standing in the kitchen. A second later, I heard him coming up the stairs. He stepped into the light and looked confused. He asked how I had gotten upstairs so fast. I told him I had been under the guest bed the whole time. He frowned and said he could have sworn he checked that room, and he heard someone moving inside. He said he thought he heard breathing. I told him I stayed perfectly still. We argued a little, but then we just shrugged it off. We played another round, but the whole time I felt uneasy. Every creak in the house made me jump. At one point while I was counting, I thought I heard something upstairs, like a soft thud, but when I searched, it was empty. I found Chris in the laundry room. We kept playing until we both got tired. Then we sat on the couch in the living room and turned the TV back on. That's when we both froze. From upstairs came a loud bump, like something heavy falling. Chris asked if it was my parents. I reminded him they were still gone. The hair on my arm stood up. We sat there waiting, but the house went silent again. Chris said maybe something slid off a shelf. I wanted to believe that, but then, while we sat listening, We both heard it clearly. A slow creak of floorboards, the sound of someone walking down the hall upstairs. We stared at each other, neither of us moving. Then I whispered that maybe we should check. Chris shook his head, saying no way, but if someone had broken in, we couldn't just sit there. I told him to stay behind me and grab the fireplace poker from beside the couch. We went to the stairs and started creeping up. The house was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. The steps groaned under our weight. When we reached the top, I pointed toward the guest room. The door was closed now. I knew for a fact